Okay, let's quickly check in. Greetings. Hopefully you are here with me. Welcome to another Wednesday night stream. Tonight we're going to be covering Ignition 8.1.10 and the improvements to the Docker image, both unofficial and official images. And yeah, let's kick things off. This is also the, I suppose, inaugural episode on my YouTube channel as well. So if you're coming to me from there, welcome. Glad to have you. And we're also streaming live tonight to Twitch, as I've been doing sudo recently and sudo regularly, kind of coming back into it after a bit of time off. If you're all wondering what I've been working on, I brought up a little picture here. There we go. Recently acquired a 2006 Trailblazer SS. You can see it there up on its jack stands, or ramps rather. Been spending some time on the mechanical side, getting things tidied up, so I've been busy with that. But anyway, enough of that. Let's just jump right into what we're going to be covering today. So, a bit of a news show. I don't really have any specific technical content prepared for you this evening, but what I do hope that we can cover is some of the changes from the latest release and get you introduced to those changes, work with them a little, and check them out. So 8.1.10 released, I think last week, maybe? Yeah, pretty close. We've got some release notes here. Obviously, there's a lot of great things, good fixes and other things. We're going to focus on the Docker side of things here this evening. Basically, right here in the deployment section. So we've got the ability now with the official image to pass gateway key value pairs for the gateway XML. This is important because somewhere further down here, it would be under reverse proxy support. There's a new setting that allows you to actually accept headers that are forwarded from your reverse proxy. And those can be enabled through the Gateway Web Interface, but if you are using the Docker image, the official Docker image, you have to specify those via the Gateway arguments. And we'll take a look at those. I don't know if they're explicitly mentioned, but we'll be able to see those when we kind of cover things. So let's go back to the deployment section. So we can pass those in with the command string just like we could with JVM and wrapper args previously. We also have support now in the same format really as my unofficial image, the environment variables for provisioning a gateway network connection or an EAM configuration, which I think these two here, the EAM selection, that's actually unique to the official image. I don't believe I have support for that yet in my unofficial image, so that's cool. So a couple tweaks there, but the ones that I kind of want to highlight here tonight more than anything else is some of the new features in my unofficial image that I was able to get in for, I think, both 8.1.9 and 8.1.10. Consider this almost a bit of a sneak preview of some of the things that might be coming, further down the line on the official. Let's take a look at the pull requests here because I've kind of organized them in that way. So for 8.1.9, these are the two big changes. We've got now a step down from root in the unofficial image. This has some unique advantages, specifically with respect to bind mounts and your file permissions. So when you're running, let's say you're on a Linux host and you are wanting to perhaps bind mount your projects folder into your container, previously you'd have to really kind of either build your own custom image or really work around the baked-in file permissions from the image. Now, my Kate Collins ignition image, let's bring this up here in a separate browser tab. If you're new to the channel, just checking in on things, you can go to github.com/3rd-gen88 ignition-docker. You can also search for it and find the links also on Docker Hub. From the very beginning, this container has used a non-root user, which is aligned with the best practices for your containers. And that user has always been kind of hard-coded in the image to UID and GID 999. I don't know that I even mention it outside of these new features here. This ignition UID and GID can now be specified as environment variables. So now you have the ability to actually declare that live. If we look at the Docker file, and again, the unofficial image, you can go to GitHub. You can see everything that makes it up, and it's all out there for you to tweak as needed or build off of. We can see if we scroll down here, it's kind of baked into the image. Now you can build your own image previously. This is not new in the Docker file here, but you could build your own image in the past and specify that UID and GID to be whatever you wanted. But you know, especially if you're sharing a development system with a couple other folks in your group, and you've got different user IDs, maybe you're doing different things. It was a pain because you'd have to potentially do different images to align with those different user and group IDs. But no longer. So now the container starts as root, and then it'll actually perform a step down after correcting any permissions issues. And I think this feature came together pretty nicely. We'll take a look at what that entails shortly. And secondly, the updated JDBC jar handling. This one was a bit of a pickle with respect to, much like your third-party modules, the JDBC jars that are used by the gateway, they're sourced from user-lib JDBC folder. Well, the problem with how things were in the unofficial image prior, I had support for linking in via symbolic links, just like we did with the third-party modules. Those JDBC jars, we could link those in from the entry point. Well, trouble is, if there were multiple, let's say you wanted to kind of pin a older version of the MariaDB jar, for example, that's built into the image already. In order to guarantee that the one that you want is loaded in, you have to make sure that the other one is gone, because it loads it based on class names in your Ignition Gateway config. So long story short, the unofficial image now has a lot smarter support for that, and it'll actually recognize when there are two JDBC jars that share the same configured class path, and it will remove one that may be baked into the image. So that was a long road, like I said, I've been kind of having this float around for the last few releases, just haven't been able to get that one to the finish line until now, but it's there. So that is what's new. Let's take a look at how it works. So let's pop into here. I've got just a simple compose definition here, and let's just start it up. This is the very basics of just a compose definition to get us running. And what we're going to see, let's see if we can bring it up on the web page here. So kind of standard issue stuff. We have some environment variables for auto commissioning, selecting the password and the edition, and those are all documented in the Docker Hub README. Also on the GitHub repo under the documentation folder, so you can go to either of these places and see the different environment variables that you can specify to customize the behavior of your container. So just the starters here, and you'll see we've got a gateway up. Well, let's use our VS Code extensions here. Looks like I've got a few other things kind of layered in here. We'll kind of try and tidy those up here. Let's go to a shell under here. And you'll notice right off the bat with the new step-down features, if you just do a standard Docker exec, which you can see, that's what our VS Code extension did for us when we right-clicked on that one. You now come into the container as root because the entry point is actually now configured to run as root. But if you look at a process listing, you'll notice that the ignition user, that non-root user, is still what's running the gateway. Which is very convenient when you're running this on a Linux host. That means that it's not running as root, right? Which is a good thing. So that's the first thing to kind of be careful about if you're used to diving into the container, making changes or adding, removing files from that shell. What you can do is actually specify the ignition user when you do your exec gateway bash, and that'll pop you right in as the ignition user. So no real big obstacles there, and if you're just editing files, it doesn't really matter. It's really only if you're creating files that might no longer be owned by that ignition user. Okay, so now we can see a few things here, and if I do another command here to view like the user ID of that ignition user, you can see it is that basic 999, which is kind of what we have baked in. No changes, right? Well, the neat part of this is, let's say that we do a Docker compose down. So this is going to stop our ignition gateway. It's going to remove that container. It'll also clean up the network here that we've defined in our one container compose stack. Our volume is still there. Now, what's interesting is if we specify ignition UID, and let's just pick a different arbitrary user ID here, and we'll save that. Let's do another compose up -d, and I'm going to also do a Docker compose logs -f. This will follow the logs after we bring it up. So you can see right here adjusting UID and GID, and the log output. Let me scroll up so it doesn't spin all the way past us here. You can see the log output here is actually showing the adjustments to those permissions, which is pretty handy. And I'm just now seeing, for whatever reason, the mouse maybe isn't showing on your screen. So sorry about that. I'm doing some new things here on the stream tonight, but most of what we're interested in is text anyway. So yeah, you can see here it actually adjusts those permissions, and if you noticed, it took a little bit when we first started that container with the new user ID. But past that, everything is up and running. If we reload our gateway, there it is. Everything's ticking along just like we expect it to. Let's break out of our log. I've noticed some different behavior in Docker Compose in the latest couple. I've been using the V2 Compose plugin, and I've noticed breaking out of the logs has changed. For some reason I have to Control C, I have to break out of it a few times. This isn't shutting down the container. You'll notice if we do a Compose PS, our container's still there and healthy. So now let's exec into the container again with our Compose exec. And we'll do that process listing. Again, it's the ignition user, but notice the ignition user is now 1004. Now if we do a a long listing, you'll notice all these permissions are correct, including in the data folder. So this is the volume from the original launch where we had 999. But the entry point has taken care of fixing those permissions. Now let's do a Docker Compose down again. So again, let's stop our container. Let's remove it. So there's no remnants. The only thing left again is that volume. And let's do another up and monitor those logs. So here we are adjusting permissions of 2106. I think before we had 2600. So it's grouping, since it says that it's following those sim links, it's following the links to the data volume. And in this new one, it only had to adjust 2100 file permissions. So it's a little quicker. Now the good news is that that only is going to occur if you're using a non-standard UID, and you could still build your own image with a custom base UID. If you're always using something other than 999, you can still do that using the build arguments that I showed you before, and maybe I'll even show you how to bake that into Compose here in a moment. But if you're just stopping and restarting your container, you don't have to wait at all. There's no extra delays. So let's just do a stop. This is different than a down. Right, this is just stopping our container. If we do a PS-A, you can see that our gateway container is still there. The same ID that we just started a moment ago, it's just stopped. And let's do start, and then we'll do let's just do the last 25 or so. Okay, so now we can see staging user step down. It basically had to adjust no permissions that time. So basically, long story short, is that once you're cooking with your alternative user and group IDs, you're good to go. You don't have to there's no extra processing to speak of. So your container starts are still pretty much just as fast as they were before. There's only going to be that adjustment if you recreate your container, which may happen in container orchestrators. But even then, it's not too bad, especially if the bulk of your gateway state is in your data folder, right? All of your perspective, project files and everything, those are going to be remaining in your volume, so you won't have to wait for those to get adjusted if you do a recreate. It's just the ignition base files, so there's 2100 or so files that we saw on this most recent recreate cycle. So that's good. Now let's say that you're on a Linux machine. You always want ignition UID 1000. Well, certainly now you can just specify those as environment variables, but I do want to show you how you can bake that in. And this you've been able to do with my unofficial image for quite some time. So let's set up a GW build folder here. Let's create a Docker file, and I don't know if we even really, I think we have to have something, but we don't need anything more than just the from statement, right? What we can do is a build directive. We're going to set the context to be our gateway build folder. And then I forget the, I'm going to look up here what the build args are. Args. It's just args. So we can specify ignition UID 1000, ignition GID 1000. And if you leave the image tag in here simultaneous with the build directive, it's going to tag the image that it builds for you. So let's just going to call it custom, -custom. So let's make sure that I'm just going to clear everything here before, clear the volume as well. And let's do a Docker compose build. Okay, so let's see. Oh, you know, actually, I told you the wrong way to do this. This is what you do if you're going to build it from not a derived image. A derived image is different. And I've been doing a lot of examples of derived images for folks recently. Since I ended up detouring us here, let me see if I can find one of the later examples here. Derived image is usually the keyword. Let's see. Yes, this one here. We had somebody on the forums post about some interesting behavior on third-party modules, which is still something that we're kind of working on the official image to get that tidied up and really done in a first-party way. This individual noticed that a recreation of their maker container was resulting in the other modules that aren't supported for Maker Edition showing up and thusly faulted because they're not supported. And what I guided them through is creating a derived image that basically injects some custom logic into that out-of-the-box entry point script, a shim, so to speak. So if you're interested in that, I guess I can pop a link here, maybe. Kind of going through a few different layers here. get back out to my streaming machine. See about that. There we go. In either case, take a look at that link. It does a pretty good example of how to build out a custom derived image. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're actually talking about is the actual Ignition Docker repository. So like I had mentioned early on, github.com/thirdgen88 ignition-docker. That's where you can find all of the code to make your own custom image, right? That's, like I mentioned, not a derived image, but a full-blown, just like you created it from scratch, because that's what this is. Let's clear out some of these things here. So if we go to 8.1, you know, one of the things that I drop in this repo is a makefile to give you some build targets that are easy to work with. And you can do make build, right? And it's going to just do a local single architecture build. There's all the other hooks for multi-arch builds and things like that. But if you do base image name, that's one of the arguments that you can add in here. Let's see. Docker build args, that we're going to specify separately. And that's going to be in our, basically right here. So we can override any of these global options here by just specifying them here on the command line, I believe. So I'm just going to say k:/ignition. The base image name targets a local repository. That's a convenience for the multi-registry or multi-architecture builds against a registry. But let's also do Docker build args, and let's say, trying to think of the syntax here. Those are just going to get passed in right on our command line. Pop open another shell here. So that's -- build arg. Build arg. Ignition UID equals 1000 -- build arg ignition GID equals 1000. Let's see if that works. So we can see here the build has been kicked off, and we can kind of see the CLI output here. -- build arg ignition UID and GID. And so basically what this will do, I'm not going to worry about letting this finish because it's rather uninteresting. But what this ultimately does is this will build an image for you locally, and it'll bake in that 1000. Again, now if you're not worried about having ultimate performance, again you can just comment this type of stuff out. Just use the unofficial image directly and specify those UID and GIDs on the environment, and the entry point will take care of the rest. So that's pretty cool. Really happy with how that turned out, and it kind of solidified the strategy for doing the root step down using the Gosu utility and making that a really rather straightforward process. Okay, the other thing we were looking at was the JDBC config, I think. Let's see here. Go to our pull requests for that 819. Updated JDBC handling. So this one, again, it's not too exciting, but let's take a look at MariaDB JDBC jars. I'm going to just see if I can locate an older version of it. And let's go ahead and bring up our solution here. And we'll exec into it. And we'll see that for the built-in one, under userlib JDBC, we can see the MariaDB jar 2.7.1. So that's the one that ships with Ignition. But let's say that you needed to pin yourself to an older version, maybe just to recreate an existing environment and make sure that you're kind of aligned with that. Or if you wanted to move up as well. I mean, whether you go up or down, it doesn't actually change things much. You still have to have things sorted properly. Here is the connector. There it is. Let's do that. Okay, so let's make ourselves a JDBC folder in here. And let's copy, let's see. Oh, users. Okay, so we've got our JDBC jar there. Now, let's exec back into our containers so we can kind of cover what happens normally when you do this through the gateway web page. We'll come back into our userlib JDBC folder. We'll see these here, and one thing that we'll notice if we pop into the internal config database and we select, I think it's JDBC drivers. This is kind of a jumbled mess, but ultimately there's a column in here that tracks the name of the file that is associated with a given config. You know, when we look at the gateway web page itself, so let's log into our gateway here. And you look at the database drivers. So each of these drivers has a record in that table. And it describes, among other things, the shape and config for that JDBC interface. But it also tracks what was the file that was uploaded for this record. And it uses that to determine which file to delete. So that's the importance of that entry here. The class path is what's actually loaded once all of these jars are loaded in. So we can see here 2.7.1. Let's actually choose a new file, and let's come to our stream demo JDBC. Let's step back to that 2.6.2. If we save that, everything's fine, right? And now we see, okay, the old file is gone, and the new file is there. Now, in order to have everything mesh from our custom JDBC jars and these ones that are baked into the image, we have to get a little creative. And from the outside, which is what we do on the unofficial image, we have some scripting in there that basically determines everything that it needs to make this all work out. So let's slowly get to the example that we're after here. Let's do a docker compose down -v. Let's wipe the slate clean. And in our volumes, all we have to do is specify a bind mount to /JDBC. So this takes our folder JDBC, mounts it into the container at /JDBC. So let's bring it back up. There are some debug options, I believe, that you can turn on to help understand exactly which jars are being loaded. But if we look at our log output here, I'm not sure if, oh yes, that's right. The very first launch, I don't believe that it will, oh, I didn't save it. That's why I'm not seeing any output related to JDBC. So let me bring that back down, save it this time, and then docker compose up -d, docker compose logs -f. Okay, so here's the first thing. If you're doing this for the first time, when we first launch with a fresh volume, there is no config database yet, which means that some of the techniques that this image uses to set the stage for those JDBC or third-party module registrations can't be done. So we have to let that get up. Once it's come up once, it's good to go. But you'll notice the very first launch, that warning will appear in the logs to let you know that, hey, no actions were taken on the part of JDBC drivers or third-party modules. So let's restart, and then let's take another look at our logs. Okay, so let's scroll up here a little bit because we're already past it. Okay, here it is. So we are searching for third-party JDBC drivers. We're linking in our 2.6.2, and then we're removing the conflicting driver. Now, what's neat about this is it actually doesn't do it based on the file name that may be sitting in that config database, which could potentially be out of date. Based on having uploaded a jar through the web interface, it's just not a guaranteed connection there. The entry point script here is smart enough to search for the class path, which should be the same between a given version, and instead kind of intelligently seeks them out, and that's how it made that connection. And it knows since we're linking in this one, this is the one we actually want to use, so it removes that, takes it out of the equation. And then if we exec into our container and we go to our userlib JDBC folder, here we see the symbolic link, and we see no evidence of that previous JDBC jar in there. So we are right where we want to be with respect to loading the correct version. So that is the other feature. If you're interested in any of what we've talked about today, on the unofficial image here, feel free to look at the commits from this pull request we're looking at. Everything's there, so if you're interested in how anything was done, if you're wanting to check out some bash scripting, take a look at it. It's all out there for others to benefit from and learn from, hopefully. And if while you're in there you see something that you think, hey, I know how to do this better, or have an idea, raise a GitHub issue. Or better than that, if you've got an idea how to do it, pull request. Those are welcome too. Either way, feel free to take a look at what we've got here. And if you have any other questions, let me know. Questions about the Docker image itself, you can reach me either on the Inductive forums. I'm there obviously quite a bit. Or if it's about the unofficial image here, you can just send me raise an issue here on GitHub. That's a good way to kind of register your question and ideally give others a chance to learn about the result from that. And perhaps even get an answer sooner. Stranger things have happened. So that is about it. That is what I have for you all today. So thanks for joining in, either live or after the fact. Appreciate it, and looking forward to one thing that we hadn't talked about. Looking forward to ICC 2021 next week. So check that out. Get registered if you're not registered already. And there's a lot of neat presentations lined up for that, as well as a collaboration platform that you can reach me and others to talk about all things Ignition. And I'll be there ready to chat about the Docker image and things of that nature. So thanks a lot, and see you next time.